Hey everyone, hope you're having a safe and blessed Tuesday afternoon. I just wanted to once again share from my heart with everyone here, this time touching on humor, how I deal with humor, and how I struggle with areas of it at times. In the last video I did, as I recap here a bit, I was touching on the differences between people who are introverted and people who are extroverted, and how people who are introverted tend to feel like they're being forced or pushed into expressing themselves extrovertedly, even when it's not comfortable for them, but kind of being pushed into it as far as, being on the same page as everybody else. And that rather than doing that, we ought to appreciate those differences in one another, learning to accept one another regardless of how we express ourselves or how our personalities and our traits are. And again, in this video, I just wanted to touch on humor. As you may recall in my last video, the same young lady who I mentioned, who posted her comment about the differences of people who are introverted and those who are extroverted, and then going into times where she felt like she was being forced to crawl out of her shell for the slapstick entertainment of others. Forgive me for looking away, I'm just looking at my notes here. How at times people use humor to try to get any type of response or reaction out of her. And I told her that I know how she felt regarding that, because I too have struggled with that, times where people would use humor to try to get me out of my shell, to try to get me to be on the same page of, comfortableness and lighting the atmosphere up a bit. And it's not that I don't understand humor or any aspects of it. And this is speaking as someone who has a form of autism. It's just that humor is not always a natural consistency with me. I don't always read too easily into humor. And even when people tend to get too carried away with it, it tends to make me a little uncomfortable. And it doesn't mean that there aren't times where I don't express myself with humor. I mean, it's not that I'm not humorless. There are times where I say things that have some humorous expressions. It's just not always a natural characteristic, a natural consistency with me, as it is with many people out there. I know that there are people out there who grew up around, people who were always so humorous, and so humor tends to be more natural with them in the way that they express themselves. And of course, for others, humor can be a type of coping mechanism. That is, if they're dealing with a sickness, or probably a medical prognosis, and they use humor as a type of mechanism to hide what they're feeling, whether it be anger, sadness, loneliness, fear. So using humor as a coping mechanism in that sense. and people who tend to use it as a defense mechanism. That is, if somebody's giving them a hard time about something, or somebody's criticizing them about something, and so they tend to use humor as a type of defense mechanism. And with me, humor is not so much of a coping or defense mechanism. And concerning my struggles with humor, sometimes I tend to feel like I'm being given a hard time about many things. For one thing, how I tend to be too quiet at times. I know I'm not always the most sociable person, or that I'm not always as pervasively interactive as many people. Though I work at it, and though I do my best to be, but there are times where I'm just naturally quiet. There's that selective mutism, which can also be a disorder in itself for many people out there. But usually people who give me a hard time about being too quiet, and of course the most common response that I get, or others out there would get, would be, why are you always so quiet? To which I would respond, well, if I'm so quiet, why are you so loud? I mean, it's only a fair question, isn't it? And it's like, in this day and age, people tend to express, that, they have a loud, exuberant, ostentatious personality, and that everyone has to accept that and deal with that. And while there are those of us who are more on the introverted, the quiet side, and if we express that, it's like, we're either being given the third degree, or just being dismissed about it, as if, well, you need to loosen up more, you need to be more outgoing, you need to be on the same page as us. And that's not always realistic. So I think it's just, mutual respect for either party, whether there are people who are more outgoing, more loud, more, out there in their personality, as well as those who are usually quiet and reserved and kept to themselves. And so there are times where I'm given a hard time or teased about that, and I realize that people aren't really doing it to hurt me or cause any harm, but sometimes people do tend to get carried away, get a little too caught up in the moment, and they may not always be aware of how they're expressing themselves, or how far they're going, or how too carried away it might get. Sometimes, feeling like I'm dragged into conversations, even conversations having to do with a humorous story, or a humorous moment that might not be too comfortable for me, or at times, feeling put on the spot about something, or like an imperfection, or like if my face is red, or just a little detail, and I tend to get pretty uncomfortable with that, a little tense with that. And even if somebody notices, something that I'm doing, like if I'm stimming. And for those of you that don't know what stimming is, it's this it's like a variety of motor reflexes, gestures, if you will, very common with people who are on the autistic spectrum. Um, I know some stimming gestures I've dealt with over the years. I used to do a lot of hand flapping, rapid hand movement when I was a kid, um, as well as a rock back and forth, which I do, still do from time to time. Maybe not so much as, other times that I did, but anyways, or, some people rapidly blink at times, or I also tend to pick my eyebrows at times, but they're still there, so they're not completely gone. But anyone who just happens to notice those stimming behaviors, those stimming functions, and tend to give me a hard time about that. Or another stimming gesture that I tend to do at times is rub my hands together, even when there's no need to. It's just one of those subconscious gestures at times, and someone feels like they have to point that out and tease me about it. And it's like, well, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, who cares? I mean, what does it matter? Do I make fun of you if you happen to do that? So, or, just doing something ordinary. Maybe most people might, not do these things as much, but like depending on certain places where I go to, like maybe mainly some restaurants, or even if I'm getting a bite to eat and then going somewhere later, and then I happen to take some floss or a travel size mouthwash with me. And I'm not saying this has happened, but just speaking hypothetically, if someone had noticed me doing that, using the floss and the mouthwash, aside from doing it at home, which commonly people do that at home, but someone happened to catch me do that, and then they end up teasing me about it, and I'm like, so I'm just using mouthwash, I'm just flossing my teeth. I mean, don't you do the same thing? I mean, how am I any different? How does this distinguish me from everyone else? So, I mean, that's just what goes on in my head, even if I don't really say it out loud. And even at times, if I were to say it out loud, for all I know, someone might get defensive about it. I mean, even though I'm trying not to be too defensive with them, but if they still happen to get defensive in return and be like, I was just asking or just making conversation. But sometimes, the way they would say it would be, a little too aggressive or defensive on their part. But anyways, there are times where I've gone a little too far myself, giving people a hard time. Some in particular, some who emphasize that, they have thick skin, and, sometimes you feel like that gives you a reason or an excuse to, give them more of a hard time or joke around with them a lot, and then sometimes you don't realize how far you go, or if you just happen to unexpectedly touch a sensitive area, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, you're going too far there. And it's like, well, I remember when we were doing this, or where we were at this place and you were giving me more of a hard time and you expected me to have thick skin and backbone about it. So, I mean, sometimes there can be those moments of double standards there. And speaking of thick skin, um, to be honest, and I've mentioned this in many other posts here and there, I mean, there are times where thick skin doesn't always come to me too easily. I mean, I tend to be pretty sensitive about some things, and there are times where even some things I may take a little too personally. I mean, I know we all tend to take things a little too personally in our own way, but like if there are times where people may be giving me so much of a hard time and they keep bringing up one comment after another, and just thinking that, oh, hey, he's an adult, he has thick skin, he can deal with it. But they're not realizing, the sensory overload that's building up within me, potentially leading to a meltdown, which I'll get into another time. But yeah, so, just those times where thick skin and backbone just don't always come to me too easily. And for a while now, I've been working hard on, doing my best to assert myself and trying to be more confident in speaking up more, and, being honest with everyone, and doing my best to let others know how I feel, or how maybe, they were getting a little too carried away with what they said, and just being honest with them. So also boundaries, and I think boundaries are important. We need to, as we're attempting to understand one another, and understanding how much someone can handle, how much humor or someone can handle. I mean, I know there are things that I can handle, and I also know that there are other areas that I have a hard time dealing with, and it's just a matter of understanding those boundaries, how far a specific joke can go. And it's not that I'm trying to make myself out to be this gloomy, grumpy, miserable kind of sourpuss person. It's just understanding that most people who have Asperger syndrome, like myself, or anywhere on the autistic spectrum, may not easily read into a particular type of joke or comment, especially if it happens to be the type of humor where you're pretending to be serious with someone, and you're really doing it well, like you mean business, like you're ready to give them the third degree, or put them in their place, or really aggressively scold them, and then all of a sudden after you've projected that fear, that intimidation upon them, and then you're like, hey, I was just kidding. Yeah, that doesn't really sit well with me, or if I imagine many people out there on the autistic spectrum. And It's not, it's not that I'm trying to be this, killjoy or buzzkill type of person, or ruin everyone's mood, or, ruin the atmosphere or anything. We're all different. I mean, we all express ourselves differently. I mean, and we just need to continue to understand those differences as best as we can and try to keep an open mind. I know there's one particular area of humor that I usually choose not to get involved in, and that's usually humor that tends to be gross. I'm not going to get too much into that because for me it would be a little too TMI, to be honest. But yeah, humor that's usually described as, rude and crude, and, as what I just referred to as gross. Yeah, I tend not to get too much into that. Doesn't mean that I, doesn't mean that I don't have anything against anyone who does. I mean, we're all still brothers and sisters. I mean, we all still love one another, and I still have respect for everyone, and as much as they have respect for me, and just that mutual respect in return. And it's just something that I choose not to engage in. And again, does that make me a type of killjoy, buzzkill person? No, it doesn't. Does that make me an unpleasant person at all? No. I mean, we just, again, express ourselves differently. And whenever I attempt to be humorous on my part, I mean, usually I just do my best to be, that is, let me rephrase that. Usually I express myself humorously on my own terms, not when I feel pressured into. I find that I'm usually more comfortable with that. And I know many people, I know that there are many people out there who are on the autistic spectrum who have learned to, express themselves more humorously and be more, relaxed and more outgoing with it. But for some of us, it's just, more comfortable for us to express it on our own terms rather than being forced or pushed into it. And I know at times I tend to be teased as far as, if I'm not expressing myself on the same level of excitement or enthusiasm as many extroverted people are, as if we're all in the same room, and I may be a little quiet and reserved about it. I mean, there are times where, I mean, it's not to say that I don't get excited at all, but, I just, am not about it. And again, does that make me a bad person? No. Also, I mean, other people have noticed how I tend to be discreet with my entrances, and the simple explanation for that is just, I just don't like drawing too much attention to myself. But it's like, most people think that everyone who enters in somewhere, that there has to be this grand entrance, this exuberant entrance, as if, royalty has arrived, or, as if you were a person in an important, grandiose position. And for me, I just kind of making my way in silently. I mean, some people might, give me a simple hello, and I might, say hi, or just, again, in that mode of selective mutism, I might give them a brief friendly smile or just kind of wave a little bit. But, it doesn't always have to be this grandiose type of entrance. And so I just wanted to clarify that there. And although this might not have anything to do with humor, but as far as physical contact, touching, I mean, I know that can be expressed in humorous ways, but as far as physical contact, I usually do pretty well with a handshake and a hug and, even a fist bump. It's when it gets to be a little too aggressive, too rough, that it doesn't sit well with me, and it just makes me more uncomfortable, more tense. If someone just literally reached out, grabbed my hand without asking for my permission, and just shaking it, even rapidly, or, giving me too tight of a squeeze, and it's like, ugh, easy on the shake there, easy on the squeeze there. Yeah, that tends to bother me there. And even if someone had just slapped me on the back, meant for it to be a pat on the back, but just kind of did it a little too aggressively, and that sends a shock of sensory overload and uncomfortableness. And I'm like, hey, dial it down there, brother or sister. So, I mean, again, it's not that I don't have anything or that I'm uncomfortable at all with physical contact. It's just, the level of intensity, depending on who it is. And I know some people out there are, huggers, and they like to give people hugs, and, even if, whether they asked for it or not, but, again, it's just, understanding that, with some people, you just got to be a little more gentle, a little more dialed down a bit. I never say that to put anyone on the spot or be critical. It's just everyone's different. So, anyways, I think that's all I have for now. I do want to touch on sarcasm a bit. I know sarcasm can be an expression that I don't always read too much into. And again, there can be times where I give maybe somewhat of a dry, sarcastic response myself, but it's not always consistent with me, while many people tend to be a little more consistent with sarcasm in their everyday language. Maybe not always every day, but and just assuming that everyone should be on the same page as they are, and being able to understand what they're saying, and express that in the same way that they're expressing it. And not everybody's like that. Anyways, that's pretty much all I wanted to share regarding that. The next video I'll be doing will still be touching on humor, but kind of looking into some of the psychology and potential meltdowns as a result of humor and other areas that maybe go extremely too far. So anyways, hope this helps everyone out there understand what it's like for me a bit more. And if you're watching out there and you're on the autistic spectrum, or maybe you also have Asperger's. I hope this makes it more relatable to you. Also, if you're a neurotypical person who's introverted and who's struggled with humor, I hope you also find this relatable as well. Thanks for bearing with me, and hopefully I've been able to express this with as much clarification as I could. So take care, and God bless. Be safe.